Hi, I'm here with Robert, who is going to be talking about one of his Holyoke tours. He does historical tours of Greater Holyoke, which include the canals, churches, cemeteries, reservoirs, parks, and streets in Holyoke, including also ones in Chicopee and South Hadley, Mass. You can find him and his tours at holyokecanaltour.org. And if anything, you can also email him at bobcat4214, capital B, at yahoo.com. Now, you're going to be doing you're going to be answering some questions about Veterans Park, correct?
Yes, I love Veterans Park in Holyoke because it was put there first and everything else grew around it. So let me first tell you about the layout of Veterans Park. The layout of Veterans Park is such that it was made into a rectangle on purpose. And what you see there now is close to what they first put in there. At some point, they did put some bushes in it. They took them out, and they did put a water fountain in. They took it out, but mostly you're seeing what you got. Now, some of the trees, of course, are newer. The Veterans Park was from 1850, and those trees in there are not from 1850. They were put later, and a lot of what is in there has been put there later, such as all the memorials to veterans of wars that the United States fought in. And so, if you go to Veterans Park, you see all this. It didn't start out that way because by its name, it was called Hampton Park, and it didn't have all these veteran memorials around them. And you get to see also around it, many buildings grew into places, churches, post office, fire stations, streets built up strongly around it. And so we're going to describe some of that through this podcast.
Yep, so you're going to describe the neighborhood that is surrounding the park, correct?
The neighborhood around it has grown up. First thing that grew up was the St. Jerome's Church. That came around in 1860 as a physical church. And it was always there before that. In 1854, some parishioners had masses right near the park. And by 1856, they became an official parish of people that met in different places, all close to the park. But the church came around 1860. So the park and the church have grown together. Also, there were schools, and most of the schools are still visible there. The old Notre Dame school from the 1880s faces right out to the park. And that became, at some point, a Holyoke Catholic high school. If you go on a tour of the park, I describe everything that faces in towards the park and out from the park. And I also have other tours that emanate from the park where we just go around a block that is right by the park, such as this year I gave one around the St. Jerome's Church campus and saw all the convents and schools. Last year I went from Veterans Park to High Street, and we saw how they were related. 2 years ago, I went from Veterans Park, and I emanated upwards to the south, and I described all of Chestnut Street. So it's great as a starting point. Now, the neighborhood includes, right on it, the old fire station that was used as a central fire station. And that was the third of 4 central fire stations in Holyoke. And it's still physically there as a building, but since the year 2000, the central fire station has moved up to Commercial Street, and now it's become a bus station and also a resource center. Along each side, though, it has its own characters. There's homes along a couple of sides. There's the old Holyoke post office there from 1935, and that, in fact, that is the 5th central post office of Holyoke. So if you go on the tour, I get to describe all these little facts, and it's great fun. Now, we want to go on to an interesting feature, which is the future.
Yeah, so what do you believe the future will be like for the park?
I think that this is such an important locus of Holyoke that will be the network from which the history of Holyoke can be described greatly. And hopefully, I have many more tours come out of there. And hopefully, someday it might be a local historic district to itself. As of right now, it has an entry on the National Register. Holyoke does have 13 entries on the National Register. One of them is called the Hampton Park Historic District, which includes all of Veterans Park and all of the former St. Jerome's Church campus, including all the schools and churches. But I hope that someday it expands and becomes a local historic district. Also in the future, I hope that people appreciate the park greatly and that all the memorials, the statues are well taken care of. This year, the statue in the middle has been refurbished, and that process will expand because you might have noticed you cannot see the names of the Civil War deaths that are engraved on three of the sides. And so those three sides will have on the base a pedestal where there will be a plaque on each three of the pedestals around the three sides. And those plaques will have the names of all the veterans that are listed up above. People cannot read the engraved names anymore, so the brass plaques on the base will have them listed out, and so you'll have 18 or 17 of the names on each of these three plaques. And people will be able to appreciate it because they have the full name of the veteran and also have what company they served in. Now, all these 55 men died during the course of the Civil War because of an illness or a wound that was suffered during the Civil War itself. So they died to serve their country. Now, the next thing we'll describe is...
We did that. Okay. Why don't you tell us about who the statue is in the middle?
Okay, the statue in the middle, and everyone gets this wrong, the statue in the middle is Columbia. Columbia is, or was, the female allegorical figure of the United States from the conception of the United States as a concept in 1730s all the way up to the 1920s. For 190 years, this was the allegorical figure of the United States. Columbia is from the word Columbus, from Christopher Columbus. He discovered the Western Hemisphere, or allowed Europe to meet up with the indigenous people of the Western Hemisphere. Now, Columbia, in the center of Hampton Park, or Veterans Park, is in the garb and with the implements of Nike, a Greek goddess of war. But notice that she has her implements in a very lowered position. She has her garments in a very subdued style. And Nike is only one of the three representations that Columbia can take on. Columbia can be put in a comic style, very colorful, and very similar to Uncle Sam. Columbia could be put in a Nike style, but she can be put in a Nike style in a warlike fashion, with swords drawn. But the third way of representing Columbia has Nike in a very subdued fashion, and that's what you have in the middle of the park. Now, people often call it Lady Liberty, but they call it a wrong name, because that is not Lady Liberty. Lady Liberty has a torch. She doesn't have a belt. She doesn't have any warlike implements. She doesn't have a shield. And she didn't exist until 1876. This is a statue of Columbia that has the hero of the United States as an allegorical figure, represents what the North wants the South to do, and that is rejoin together. And now the last feature of our podcast will be...
You told us a little bit about the St. Jerome's Church already, so why don't you just get into depth a little bit more on that?
Right. The St. Jerome's Church has grown up around it, and if you stand near the church, you can see the chapel on one side, and then look across Hampton Street, you can see the oldest convent and the newer convent. They're both old, but one is much older than the other. One was a convent for Notre Dame nuns, the other convent for the Sisters of Providence, and that became later for the sisters that would serve as teachers, and that was the Sisters of St. Joseph. Facing on to Veterans Park is the old Notre Dame School. There used to be a boys' school alongside the chapel called the St. Jerome's Institute. And along the way, Holyoke Catholic added the Chestnut Street School, which became the William Whiting School. That was a school that started in 1850, changed and rebuilt in 1920, and then had a new owner of Holyoke Catholic by the late 1980s, and it was fully integrated with classrooms and so forth. And so this church is a great representation of what can be done with a park, a neighborhood, and a church all together. So thank you for coming on this podcast and my information.
Thank you, Robert. And again, you can find his tours at holyokecanaltour.org. And you can always email him as well at bobcat4214, capital B, at yahoo.com. Again, BOBCAT4214, capital B, at yahoo.com. Thank you.